America and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room, episode 162 for January the 15th, 2020. I was having trouble typing that in the show notes today, so
I was too.
I'm having trouble being able to say it as well. My name is Wesley Fryer, and I am the technology integration and innovation specialist at the Cassidy School here in Northwest Oklahoma City in the Village, where finally, I don't know, man, we had 30 minutes literally of snow last weekend, just flurries, and so our little puppy experienced that. But we will not talk at length about weather, although the dog may make a short cameo. I'm excited that I'm not doing the show alone because I wouldn't do it alone. I'm with Dr. Jason Neiffer from Missoula, Montana, who I'm guessing has had more than 30 minutes of snow flurries in the last, few weeks. Probably.
Yes, it is 12 degrees outside right now in Missoula. It's not as bad as in north central Montana. My parents live in Great Falls, the town I grew up in, and they hit negative 22. It was either last night or 2 nights ago, so it's a bit chilly there, but not a ton of snow there, but we're starting to get quite a dusting here. And it's interesting because west of me, I have friends in Spokane and in upstate Idaho, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho to be specific, and I've been seeing videos from there of large snow dumps that people are shoveling away, and that has not made it over to western Montana yet. But we're not here to talk about the weather. Instead, it's about technology, and I am the assistant director and curriculum director of the Montana Digital Academy, the state virtual school located on the University of Montana campus in fabulous Missoula. And this whole ditty here is the EdTech Situation Room, where once a week, Wes and I scour the headlines looking for interesting stories, and then we try to take a look at what's going on in the tech world and maybe apply it to the education world. And if you want to see the articles that we're talking about and see some of the source material, you can go to our website, edtechsr.com. Dr. Fryer always posts our show notes there, as well as our document where we have tons and tons and tons and tons of links for your review. And in a lot of cases, way more links than we can otherwise talk about in our hour show each week. So, Wes, I guess this is about the time I should ask you where you want to start, but I do think that there's 2 interesting headlines, although there may be some breaking news at the Fryer.
Well, actually, the breaking news is going to be our dog, who has gained 5 pounds in the last 3 weeks, and my wife is going to attempt to wrestle him. He did draw blood on my ear. Maybe you just need to hold him. So this is Moose. Hey, buddy. He likes to mouth. So, the key is the best thing to do is to have something that he can chew, that you can just put right in his mouth. But he's actually not right now, but doing a better job sometimes, not always wanting to bite. So anyway, yes, Moose
his ear.
was born. Oh, yeah, your ear's all weird, Moose. He was born on October 15th. So, and he's doing pretty good. We haven't had any accidents in quite a while. And there you go. Something completely not at all. Yeah, I'm sure we could probably draw a few more live viewers with, the Golden Retriever puppy live shot. So, but I digress. I don't know. Why don't we start off with Internet Explorer? That was your article. Do you want to?
Yeah, in fact, there's 2 big Microsoft announcements from this week. Yesterday, January 14th, Windows 7 entered end of life stage, which means that for the vast majority of Windows 7 users, it is no longer a viable operating system from a security standpoint, because it will no longer receive security updates. And of course, that's super interesting because of how long Windows 7 kind of held onto its ninja grip on large enterprises, which would also include schools. And it's interesting because it's been an interesting challenge. We've experienced this twice now in my organization, Montana Digital Academy. And the reason why is because we support students in 200 plus schools at any given time, plus a very large variety of home computers. And one of the things that has been an interesting phenomenon is that, we oftentimes, but we will occasionally get a relatively pushy response to a support ticket when we say that we can't support end-of-life operating systems. These are no longer supported by Microsoft, which means that we really can't support them, and you would need to upgrade to a newer version of that. And it's also true that in a lot of cases, those operating systems function just fine, but that's not us drawing that line. That is our vendors drawing that line. And we've had support briefs from a number of vendors in the last year, but intensified in the last 14 days, that Windows 7 is no longer a supported operating system for our vendors. So if something's truly going wrong and we pull in a vendor technical support desk, they will tell us that, the most obvious problem is you're not using the latest operating system, or I'm sorry, a supported operating system. And whether or not that is the cause of the problem, unfortunately, that's oftentimes what we'll hear when we bring in the big dog technical support from other organizations. So certainly an issue, an interesting phenomenon, but Windows 7 is no longer supported. So I will say, from my standpoint, as family IT guy, I did upgrade my last computer to Windows 10 last week. My father-in-law's computer was actually a very, very good i7 computer from 7 years ago, 8 gigs of RAM, more than fast enough. But because he uses his personal computer, and with the personal computer has financial data and stuff on there that could potentially be an issue if there's a security compromise, I had to nudge him and force him to update to Windows 10. So that happened last week, and he is good to go. But I would imagine there are a lot of schools that have been pushing to get rid of those Windows 7 computers, or have not quite got there yet. So I know, Wes, you are a former, maybe one would say recovering IT director from your institution, and now you're obviously in a more classroom role. Were there any remaining Windows 7 computers on your campus?
No, that was a transition that we were able to complete as far as Windows 10. And Windows, was, and I think still is, fairly generous in terms of upgrade. We ended up we did purchase a block of licenses, but to my knowledge, we have gotten everyone updated, and we've also switched over some labs, but everything is up to date. So the greatest pain points that we had with that actually were with respect to firmware on some Dell, all-in-one computer.
Right.
So the other related article that you put in there on Microsoft was the Chromium browser, and that launched, I guess, today on the 15th.
Yep.
So this was the Verge talking about Chromium for both Windows and Mac OS.
Right. And so the Edge browser, which is the new Microsoft browser that came with Windows 10 in 2015, has really been the third place browser since it was launched. I liked Edge. I thought Edge was a vast improvement over Internet Explorer, but it had some missing features for me, including I do use a lot of browser extensions as part of my daily work. I live on the web. 99.5% of the work I do is through a web browser, and so it wasn't as clear of an option to me. And then I think it was about a year ago, Microsoft announced that they're doing something that, it's my understanding, rumors say that actually Apple's thinking about doing too, but they updated an ancient WebKit that was the background of both Edge and Internet Explorer to Chromium, which is the open source browser that Google develops as part of the open source community. It's not Chrome. Chrome is an adapted version of Chromium, but Chromium is you can download Chromium itself and use it as a browser, or as Microsoft has done, it's taken the underlying code, built stuff on top of it, and then they've been running a beta for the last 8-9 months, open beta, and then today it's official. And slowly, Windows 10 users will be pushed over to this new version of Edge. And I have to say, I like it. It's fast and crisp. They did build a lot of Microsoft-looking stuff on top of it, so the kind of Edge feel to it, the look and feel of Edge remains in Chromium Edge, but I love it that I can download Chrome extensions, and so you don't have to worry about the fact that developers weren't really developing for the Edge browser. And so all the stuff I do to make my browser better, in fact, I'm in my personal Chrome account right now, and I have a dozen or so extensions that are live, and another dozen or so that I have temporarily shut off with Extensity, which is a past Geek of the Week from our past podcasts, but and I can now do that on Edge. So really interesting development.
The article says that History Sync and Extension Sync don't work, or they didn't at launch. Is that working now as far as your extensions? Or did you have to reinstall them each time you loaded the browser?
Well, so interesting. I didn't run into that today because I actually didn't have a synced profile. So it is interesting they aren't syncing those because that would impact my use of the browser. And in fact, because I created a fresh profile today for my work account and did play with it for a little while. I happened to be on a PC for a couple hours today, which usually I'm a Chrome OS guy almost 100%. But yeah, that's interesting. That would be a feature that would be pretty critical for me.
And that could be something that they add. The thing that I was most interested in this article, talking about the differentiators, are privacy. And we talked last week in the show about how Apple returned to CES, and they were really, peddling privacy and promoting their support of privacy. This article says that Google is phasing out third-party cookies and trackers in Chrome, but not for 2 years. So for the next 2 years, alternative browsers, Edge, Firefox, Safari, they are going to, well, and I guess not, and then this, Chromium by Microsoft. It says that if you're familiar with Ghostery, you'll be familiar with Microsoft's built-in Edge protection. Gives you 3 different levels to avoid being tracked. And I think this is a fascinating thing, right? Lots of people today don't care, quote unquote, really about privacy on the web. And I think, hey, Shelly, I think the dog needs to go out. We've been watching the dog, and when he approaches the door, he actually has scratched a few times. So anyway, apologize for that squirrel. So anyway, it's interesting that a lot of folks don't care about privacy. And so I don't know, is this going to be a reason for you, Jason, to consider if Google doesn't phase out some of those tracking? I get you can install extensions today in Chrome like Ghostery that I think do block tracking. What are your thoughts about the privacy features here? And do you think that's a compelling reason to think about this in schools? Would this be a browser to make available in a school situation with a one-to-one or a lab or something like that?
I absolutely do think it belongs in amongst the browser choices. And by the way, I get that this is a little bit of a pain, but I really think a real power user ability is to have multiple browsers on your computer. Not only it may mean less. I mean, I guess in my mind, the good news about Edge built on top of Chromium is that it's more likely if the Chromium base becomes the de facto language for the web, developed as an open source project. Yes, Google runs the project, but it's an open source project with open standards. That to me is a win for all of us, right? Because that means web developers can aim at that one broad audience. It's more likely to work. But part of what I previously didn't really like about Chrome OS, it's different now because you can technically install Firefox on a Chromebook. It now runs Linux, which means you can install the Linux Firefox version, and so you can have both browsers. But every power user I know keeps at least 2 browsers available to them because oftentimes if it doesn't work in one, it'll work in another. And today or this week, it's finals week at the Digital Academy. We have 2,000 students across the state taking finals with us this week, and it's a time when our support desk dramatically increases in traffic. And one of the things that is, we sometimes will get an eye roll from folks when we suggest this, but it's really amazing to me that even in 2020, 50% of the time switching browsers will fix a lot of immediate issues in regards to web pages. And so I'm looking forward to Edge actually being available on the Linux platform, because then I will definitely install Edge onto my Chrome OS devices as part of my multiple browser strategy. But absolutely, I think that school districts, if you're not already headed in that direction, and my guess is that Microsoft has already been in touch with large school enterprises to say, we'd love for you to move towards the new Edge right away so they can help test this in an educational environment. But my early review is that it's a good, solid browser. I am like, obviously I'm concerned about privacy, but I also think that some of the hand-wringing that happens over privacy is not as fair as I think it needs to be. If you are worried that Google's tracking you and yet you are a Facebook user, and you're accessing Facebook, whether it's on an app or on a browser, there's a lot more tracking going on there, I think, than in the typical Google search and Google world. And also, most ad systems, which there are ad systems owned by every major computer manufacturer and operating system peddler, short of Linux, available in the marketplace. Chrome OS tracks you. I'm 100% sure that in the Safari browser, Apple does own ad networks. I do think that there's probably some tracking going on there, and I think it's happening with Microsoft as well. Like, I am concerned about the tracking, and obviously when I search for something in a Google search on one computer, and 10 minutes later I see an ad pop up on Instagram, I'm concerned about that. But we're far from getting to a point where we can say we can protect ourselves from it, short of completely disengaging from technology.
Another thing I mentioned about this article, it's a little bit odd, is Microsoft actually released this Edge browser for Windows 7, even though official support for that. But can enterprise users, I think for some of the server versions of Windows, enterprise users can continue to pay and receive updates. Is that true for 7 too, that they're letting enterprise users keep on trucking? So that would be the reason probably for the release of this for Windows 7, even though for consumers, you wouldn't be able to, have official support from Microsoft.
And I've seen references on Reddit in discussions about the end of life of Windows 7 that a lot of big institutions that have gone all in on Windows 7, banks, large industrial applications, the embedded version of Windows 7, which is things you might find in an X-ray machine or industrial factory robot. I believe that the end of life is later on those types of applications, but also you can buy updates, and I think it's for a long time too, like 3 to 5 years more updates for that. But they make that expensive, right? They don't want people doing that just because they are unwilling to update to Windows 10. There needs to be a real financial reason behind it.
You got to pay, and you got to be enterprise too. You can't be an individual to do that. It also mentioned in the article that Google Meet and Google Stadia were not working within the beta period of Edge. I had my first experience with the new Google Meet. They have Hangouts, but now Google Meet is not a consumer Gmail product. You have to use it with G Suite. But we had our first EdCamp OKC organizer meeting this past Monday, and anyway, it worked great. So I think I'll give it a try. We've continued to offer Firefox, and it's kind of a baby duck syndrome thing with a lot of people as far as like what browser they really love and use a lot. And we've got a handful of folks that love Firefox, and that's their browser. But for the same thing that you said, it's always good. Of course, on a Mac, you've got Safari that comes built in, but it's good to have other options. And where at one point Chrome was just the absolute fastest, beating all other competitors. Safari sped up a lot, and Firefox has done a lot as well. So I might segue us to actually another browser article, but not about Microsoft. This I put under security, and this was on January the 10th from Digital Trends. The U.S. government says you need to update Firefox right now. In fact, our technology manager emailed this out to everybody, and these kinds of warnings are not super common. So this was from the United States Department of Homeland Security, Cybersecurity, and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, never heard of that before, is encouraging those with a Firefox browser to update to version 72.0.1. And it says an attacker can exploit a vulnerability to take control of an affected system. This vulnerability was detected in exploits in the wild. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. So did you all speedily let everyone at the Digital Academy know that Firefox, needed to be updated? Otherwise, hacks could be imminent.
We do forward on articles that we get in regards to updates. We're in a unique position because all of our teachers remote to us, and they provide their own technology. And I don't worry about teachers that are using laptops from school, because I know those are usually extremely well managed. But teachers that use home technology. It's something we do think about and try to provide guidance on because, and, I know this from being, home IT guy or family IT guy, is that, it's not good security practice, right? Good updating practice is not something that's automatic. And the typical end user, even very savvy users, my in-laws are a good example of this. Both my mother-in-law and father-in-law are pretty advanced tech users. They don't like to talk about that or say that because they don't think they are, but they're pretty good with tech. And yet, I help them run updates. I push them to run updates. I tell them not to ignore updates. My mom, who's been using computers since the early 80s and used to use a CPM-based K-Pro to do accounting in the early 1980s. I mean, I have to nudge her to do updates. And if that's true of tech-savvy home users, it also has to be true of professionals that, maybe aren't of the nerd set. So yeah, good safety advice. And that's true of really all your software. There's really no reason to avoid updates, period.
I'm actually trying to open up, I've got the latest version of iOS and trying to open up a Google Doc in there. It keeps jumping me over to the app. So obviously on the iOS platform, we're not going to be seeing Edge, but, continue to have multiple browser options there. And the good news is it doesn't tend to make that big of a difference. Maybe it does in a security context in terms of things that, are out there if you're not updating, but,
I will tell you there is an Edge beta on iOS.
Is there? Okay.
Yeah. So,
all right. Cool.
And it actually looks. It looks. I have to say, Microsoft has a new design language they've been using. This has been for a couple of years now, but they have been able to maintain that consistently over all the platforms. And that's a page I don't know if they borrowed this from Google and Apple, but I think it's smart that they kind of have everything look the same.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's a lot of discussion about Microsoft, but hey, you know what? Here on the EdTech Situation Room, we tend to not want to simply pigeonhole ourselves in a single kind of technology. So we're going to talk about more sorts of things. Here's a quick one that's kind of interesting. Probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, I mentioned an article that was kind of weird about drones that were being sighted in eastern Colorado and western Nebraska. They were flying at night in formation and just really weird. Well, the Associated Press today on January 15th released an article, Snopes, and there were a couple other outlets, of course, that reprint AP articles. The title is Theories Persist About Mystery Drones Seen in Rural Region. And the summary is that the Colorado authorities have announced that nothing to worry about, folks. Most of these were just hobbyists, and they were flying some kind of a heat-seeking plane or some kind of detection plane that was able to find these. But basically, they aren't announcing what it was. There's been a lot of conspiracy theories. F.E. Warren is a Air Force base that has missiles that's out there. The article actually says, and this probably isn't a surprise, that Air Force bases, military installations have anti-drone technology to be able to shoot down drones that might be penetrating their airspace. Again, which is something I guess, we should just all assume, but I hadn't actually read that in an article before. But they are trying to calm the public and saying nothing to look at here, folks. But there's a lot of people that have had issues because these drones, alarm animals, and they're causing some physiological responses from those that are out there. But there were also some articles I saw, and this is where Google News is also great because you can see related coverage and it'll show you a whole bunch of articles. Folks are saying that nothing illegal here, because if it's uncontrolled airspace, there are rules about operating drones, and they're talking about having more restrictions. But in the current restrictions that are in place, evidently there's nothing here that is illegal. So educational connection there would be, not only flying drones, but coding drones and the support that goes around them is going to continue to be a big deal. And so one of our, I think I might have mentioned this on the show, but our makerspace teacher was telling me, I guess he had been reading articles about UPS hiring and using drone delivery, not as much just to, bring your packages from Amazon, but, take blood plasma, deliver vital, medications, things like that. I would wonder, Jason, if in a very rural and even much larger state than Oklahoma, Montana has got lots of wide open spaces. Have you heard anybody say anything about, drone delivery of medicine or blood plasma or anything? Or is that something that community colleges are doing, training about? Do you hear anything about drones like that?
I've not heard anything like that, but I have heard references to the fact that drones could really help a state like Montana in exactly those things, right? I mean, I see it in terms of the challenge of weather here, right? Like Montana is a large state, right? If you start in Missoula in western Montana and head 8 hours west of us, you're in Seattle. If you head 8 hours east, you're still very much in Montana, and that's something that blows some people's minds when you start to take a look at a map, right? We have a county that has a larger area than Rhode Island. So it's a big state. But I do think that's really interesting when it comes to delivery of critical things in weather. There are a lot of folks that live very remotely in Montana. I'm not talking about towns. I'm talking about people that are nowhere even near a 2-horse town. Or post office, or even in places where emergency medical care is available. We have a very large helivac system here where we can get air ambulances to locations in very remote areas, but there are instances, I'm sure, where that would not be necessary if a drone is available. But yeah, I think that technology is extraordinary. But like we've talked about in the original article we talked about last week or a couple weeks ago about the mysterious drones that you were speaking of, I do think we need to be regulating this more, right? I don't think it's healthy for us to have hobbyists and commercial applications flying willy-nilly. Sound like an old guy there complaining about the new technology. That's everything's flying willy-nilly everywhere. But we have to get some point to where that is more strongly regulated. Agreed.
I successfully downloaded the Disney Plus app and logged in with my password manager to be able to say this. We did a little trial and have been enjoying Disney Plus as a new option. There's a 2019 movie by Disney called Togo: The Untold True Story. And it is about the 1925 champion dog sled trainer and his lead sled dog, Togo, and it's up in Alaska. And so evidently they had to transport antitoxin serum to a small town. And anyway, and of course, storms and things like that are not only, tough on traditional ways of traveling, but also drones. So I'm not necessarily sure a drone would solve that. But anyway, interesting to think about how those things may affect our lives and change some things. So where would you like to go next?
Well, let's do some technology correction articles. And for those that are new to the podcast, we refer to kind of the scaling back or reconsideration broadly of technology. I would say generally 2017 and on as the tech correction, right? That we appear to be trying to figure out where all this stuff fits. Lots of interesting articles this week here. First, Instagram has announced new functionality where they will identify to end users and potentially hide and deprioritize posts that are considered to be fake photographs, right? But as many of you know, the Instagram happens to be somewhat dominated by heavily altered photos, right? In fact, Instagram started as that's not entirely true. They were, I think, a location check-in service to start with, but they eventually pivoted to this photo sharing site. And as it turns out, one of the earliest things was adding filters to photos. That's what Instagram's early brand name was all about. And then, of course, if you spent any time on Instagram at all, you know that putting dog ears on people or having something sit over your head and decide which Disney character you are, and that whole notion that it's heavily modified photos has really been the Instagram brand, right? Like, it's photos, yes, it's certainly a lot of photos of foods and sunset, but it's also heavily altered photos with filters. Well, now digital artists, not that are using filters, but actual digital artists are developing heavily modified images or drawn images, or adding you could say filters, but when it's more of an artistic thing, it's probably artistic license that may look like a filter, but it's probably a little more complex and nuanced than that. They're getting deprioritized in feeds, and they are not happy about that. And I think this kind of goes to the fact that it's just not as easy. Everyone wants this to be easy, like we can uninvent this technology, but unfortunately that's just not the case, right? Like, I get why there is value in telling people that a photo is not a photo, or it looks like something suspicious with this. But as it turns out, a lot of heavily modified photos are done so for artistic purposes and not to deceive you or to, try to sway a political election. So that hard balance is a, really big part of this. And Wes, we're obviously friends on Instagram, so we see photos back and forth. But my guess is you're not going to Instagram to get the latest news.
I am not. I enjoy Instagram, and I post there. Sometimes cross posting, sometimes posting some different things. But yeah, it is not somewhere that I'm getting news. I was asked, a couple weeks, was it 2 weeks ago? We almost went to war against Iran. It was crazy. We went up to the brink, and our daughters were, Dad, is World War III happening? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And they said, well, memes, and they were seeing so many different memes. And it is amazing. Even young kids, lots and lots of our middle schoolers are on TikTok, and memes are everywhere. And so anyway, yeah, it's not where I get my news, but it is where a lot of folks have their eyeballs, and, news as well as entertainment and all other kinds of things. What do you want? It's probably, if it's something you can click and scroll through, then it's probably going to be something that, Facebook and Instagram are going to experiment with heavily and possibly provide. So I think it's good they're responding, but I think it was last week we had an article about, just it was, Facebook just banned deep fakes, but the policy has loopholes. I mean, there's all kinds of issues that this is fraught with. So yeah, technology is not going to save us, and AI is not going to solve this, tomorrow, or maybe forever. I don't know. I mean, we don't have technological solutions for this. And here's my new metaphor, by the way. So in terms of the information environment and where we are, it's like we're having to walk through a hurricane. And that's all this information, and we are just being battered. We're not inside a climate-controlled vehicle at all, being protected from the elements. It's like we're naked, trying to walk through, devastating winds, hail, just tornadoes. Just it's crazy. And I feel like, in terms of being a parent, there's a lot of frustration and remorse, even, I think, about how we can't protect children today to the degree we could in the past from a lot of darkness and even current events. There was a good NPR I heard yesterday or this morning about talking to kids about difficult news and how we do that. So anyway, the tech correction is part of our awareness, I think, of some of those negatives that technology is bringing to us, to our lives personally, screen time effects and addictions and things like that, but also, politically. And there is not an easy answer. Media literacy is going to continue to be important. And that's one of the reasons why I was encouraged this summer you mentioned Rhode Island, at Providence, Rhode Island, at the Digital Literacy Institute, to really take on the mantle of being, a digital literacy, media literacy educator. That's what they said, what do you want outside your door? I said, media lab and our number, and Wes Fryer digital and media literacy. That's what I do. So we need to be doing more of that, because, there's certainly not, there's all kinds of things, policies and things that companies can do and governments can do, but there's not going to be something that will, quote, solve and fix all of that.
Speaking of, there was also a great article in the New York Times over the weekend called Techlash Hits College Campuses. And this, I mean, if you need any other real symbol of how the tech correction's happening, this article details, talking to mostly recent college graduates and also those that were kind of sucked into the tech job bubble 10, 12 years ago, that a lot of recent college graduates are moving away from going to big tech companies because they feel like that their skills will be used for ethically challenging ways. And obviously, companies like Facebook and Google and to a different extent Amazon are obviously become very controversial in the last couple of years, and a lot of hot talent from, in a lot of cases, very, very, very respected schools and computer science and other college degrees, engineering degrees that otherwise would have been looking for what someone might perceive as a jackpot, right? job in Silicon Valley with a six-figure salary and millions of perks, that a lot of folks are saying that they don't want to work for companies that they perceive to have ethically challenging practices. And I am very interested in that notion. I always believe, I think one of my core beliefs as a teacher is that teaching is important because the people you're teaching now may save you later, right? And probably will change the world in a way that benefits you down the road. And it's interesting that 20-somethings are eschewing this notion of vast riches and fast stock options because they necessarily challenge the economic models of those systems. So, Wes, I wanted to express this of you because I know you happen to have someone in the family that's a relatively soon college graduate. And what's the job market looking like for? And is he computer engineering or another kind of engineering?
So he's mechanical engineering, which is typically the largest engineering degree. His minor is computer science. There's a fancier phrase for it of like intelligent systems, but basically he wants to code hardware. That's what he's done the last couple summers, this last summer, and then this whole year he's continued to work with a professor who has projects with both flying and ground-based drones, and so we had a chance to actually go out to Tinker Air Force Base after Christmas and visit with them a little bit. And he doesn't have a job yet. He had several interviews and things at the fall job fair, and I think in February the next job fair is coming up. But one of the clarifications he's told people is he doesn't want to go code like for Facebook and Google. I mean, he's not making web pages. He doesn't want to do that kind of thing. It's writing code for embedded systems and hardware and robots, drones and stuff like that.
Yep, very interesting. And then a couple other quick hit articles here under the tech correction. There's a great Time article. We don't need to jump into this, but it kind of fits a theme we've been talking about the last couple of months. You've probably heard that blue light's bad for you at night because it does something, prevents sleep patterns. This is one study, and if you learn anything about research, is that one study is meaningless compared to a number of replicable studies, but the latest research seems to suggest that the blue light thing is actually bogus and it doesn't really have an impact on sleep. And so if you're interested in that topic, Time has a great article from, I think it's January 10th, something that's worth your time at looking at. And then you have an article, sir, about media literacy.
Yeah, this was from EdWeek on January 8th, and it says more states say they're teaching media literacy, but what that means varies. 14 states have addressed media literacy and put it into law, and there's advocacy groups like Media Literacy Now that is trying to promote that. I think it is important for us to talk about, but it's also important to say that we're not just, nothing is going to, quote, save education with, mandates. Politically, the winds, blow and they come and go in terms of what, Common Core was all the rage not too long ago. So I'll say this, mentioned Providence, Rhode Island, and that digital and media literacy institute. There was a big team from Brazil that came because Brazil has mandated nationally that, media literacy be an important part of the curriculum. And so I do think it's really, really important. There's, of course, so many things that are important in education, and most teachers or many teachers certainly feel, overloaded with mandates, and, it's just hard to have the time to be able to do what you want to do. But that's, I think, related to the tech correction. And here is one of my predictions. We've talked about this before. We're not a political show, but we'll reference, different political things. Multiple authors that we have talked about in the past and articles we've shared say that we ain't seen nothing yet when it comes to politics and the ways in which we're going to see disinformation, utilized, weaponized. We've got lots of shadowy folks, non-state actors, state actors building Facebook followings. We've talked about how that website that creates people's faces now, is being utilized by people to make these different groups, and these sound innocuous. And hey, something that's very pro-America patriotism, pro-military, pro-Christian. There's these different causes, but the reason these things are being built is so that those groups, we can push buttons and pull levers to make people upset, emotional, share things, think things. So anyway, that is in that whole tech correction category of media literacy. I'll do a quick one that I put down underneath miscellaneous. So this is from NPR on January 10th. And the title is Boeing Employees Mocked FAA Privately in Emails Before the 737 MAX Disasters. And if you either listen to or read that article, my takeaway was this is a great case study in why email retention is important to be aware of, right? Every organization has some kind of policy about how long they retain email. And I won't belabor the long story, but basically a couple summers ago when I was the director of technology for our school, I had to respond to a lawsuit and a judge's order and generate out of our Google Vault, the files that met the specific criteria that the judge, specified. And people will say things like, hey, your email is saved for 5 years, but I don't know if people really, have that, if that's been made concrete enough to say, any judge in any kind of courtroom in the United States can have an order to your organization and say, I want to see every email that Jason ever sent that had this word in it, or that was to this person, or that was, in this date range, or whatever. And that can, become part of official court materials. They can become headlines in the news, et cetera. So obviously, Boeing is not very happy about these kind of things being released. And, this makes for, I guess, attention economy journalism, right? Because we're going to pay attention to it. But I think we need to be doing a lot more, by the way, with email skills. We need to stop assuming everyone, will just be able to handle, whatever quantity of email happens to come their way, process it efficiently, and, basically be an email ninja. And that is not something we're born with in our DNA. I would bet, Jason, you probably have some very formidable email skills. I know you've talked about some of the, text shortcut things and ways, because you process a huge amount. I wonder, and this would be a shout out for anybody listening, if you found something like this, I'd like to have some kind of a tool tracking, and this would be interesting even within the G Suite organization. Maybe the reports have this, but on average, how many people, how many emails do people get per day? You could, if you just did this on a personal basis, it would be interesting. Because, how many people do you know that if they open their email, they kind of want to hide it because they're a little embarrassed about how many emails are in their inbox because they've just really given up trying to keep that thing empty, and inbox zero is just a fantasy. So I know you've done sessions about different kinds of Google tricks and stuff. Have you thought about writing a book about that? Like just a little short book of, Gmail ninja tricks? Maybe that's something that is already out there, but it just seems like such an important skill that we're just going to have to keep with. It's not going away.
It's funny. I've been talking email a lot lately with other folks, and something we talk a lot about the Digital Academy is I'm a really big fan of this notion that you've got to be extra nice in email. And to be clear, I don't always meet that challenge. If I rattle off a quick email, sometimes I come off as rude and curt and not necessarily aggressive. And so, having been bitten by that more times than I care to say, I work really hard to make sure that my emails are overwhelming in their pleasant tone, because email's a really tricky thing. But it's funny because, not all of the edu-tech Twitter sphere agrees that email is a technology that's worth saving. And it's not about individuals, but there have been a couple of people that make fun of colleges, for example, because they're reporting that kids aren't opening their emails, and they say, well, it's because kids don't use emails and you should text or I don't know, TikTok them instead. But the bottom line is that first, that's not entirely true. The kids don't use email, and in fact, when we send out, they're not really marketing emails. When we use marketing systems to send out emails to the Digital Academy, our highest opening rate happens to be students as opposed to parents or site facilitators. So that's a piece of it. But also, Manoush Zomorodi, the host of Zigzag podcast, she's now the new host of NPR's TED Radio Hour. She has a really interesting thing that she talks about, that, you know, we have a lot of people wringing their hands about social media having all these negative impacts. We got a lot of us complain about our email, but I think you'd have a hard time making a case that email has been any more than an occasionally a nuisance, right? It's a good stable technology that's been around for 30 years now, and it's a good communication technology. It's not perfect, but it's a good communication technology. And I think it's something that we should be mindful of, and something I've been very impressed with, Wes. I know you posted your lessons for your upper elementary students that you taught on Gmail basics and the basics of using and writing and utilizing these tools. I think that's lost in a lot of schools, and we're not teaching kids. And then we wonder why kids send rude emails, right? And in a lot of cases, you know, things that and I probably put up with more than the typical teacher did when I was in the face-to-face classroom, but you know, things that kids would say in jest in a classroom, or because they felt comfortable in a classroom, that was uttered in an email, would be an outrage. And I think we do need to think about and spend more time you know, thinking about how this technology, which is not going anywhere. I don't care. Email has been apparently dying for 20 years and it's still around, kids. So, you know, we have to deal with it in terms of the technology that's actually getting used.
Here's two quick ones. This one was from a couple of weeks ago, but Ars Technica, January 6th. SpaceX is now the world's largest satellite operator. Crazy. Wow. And, you know, what some people think Elon is doing is basically setting the groundwork to, you know, be the world's largest internet service provider, not only to, you know, be able to support, you know, the fleet of Tesla cars that require updates and things like that. But, you know, my experiences have been very limited with satellite internet, but it basically is really bad. It has been. And especially on an upload, you know, even the download's been really, really slow. Think, you know, edge and pre-edge cellular network speed. So that was a quick one that was of interest. And then this one's local, but the Oklahoman, which is our largest, you know, paper by circulation here in Oklahoma City, yesterday published an article titled "They Want Them Gone. Norman Parents Complain of School Devices." And evidently there were about over 100 parents at the school board meeting. Norman is a community south of Oklahoma City where the University of Oklahoma is located. And about a year ago, they started a one-to-one learning initiative with iPads with younger kids and MacBook Air laptops for the olders. And so all kinds of complaints about pornography, about screen time, about cost. And I actually stayed up last night and wrote a little response to that. And, you know, won't go through the whole thing, but basically my summary is, you know, we need, if you have school provided devices, to have a filtering solution. Of course, parent education is hugely important, and Norman schools have done a lot. Their initiative is called EdTech, but you know, the web of 2020 is not the web of 2005 or whatever. You know, you want to go back in time, and so it is. I think there's a lot of frustration that we, like I mentioned earlier, that we have about not being able to protect students, and you know, when students have devices and they can, you know, access all kinds of things, we can even speak and do searches and things like that. We don't even have to know how to necessarily spell and write. You know, younger kids can do things. It remains a wild west, and I think there's a lot of you know, things that could be happening in any community in terms of, you know, angry parents about, you know, some of those kinds of issues. We've talked about some of those on the show, and, you know, some things happen with laptops and objectionable content and things like that. Something I put in here too is, hey, don't forget the phone, right? I did this research last night, quick Google search, but latest Pew Internet, I think from August of 2019, shows that about 95% of U.S. teens report that they have access to a smartphone. Now, they don't say what percentage of those phones are completely unfiltered, But based on my own experiences working with students and parents, I would say the vast majority. There are a few folks that are doing things like Disney Circle Go, and credit to both Google and Apple for putting in more parental controls and features. But hey, you got to enable those and set those up, and you got to parent, right? That's kind of hard to do, and so I think that parents that are just angry at school for all of this, these are societal issues, and it's not just, it's not only, hey, my school, either made us get one or bought, a device that they've now sent home. So any thoughts on those?
Yeah. There's a flip side to this, right? That, I mean, I think about in terms when you say that Pew Internet number, that 95% of teens have access to some kind of mobile internet device. Well, 15 years ago, it was that teachers like us were in classrooms trying to help kids get more access to technology because it's become a critical tool and because it can empower you to do some pretty amazing things. And on the other side of it, there was a massive digital divide, right? A lot of kids had home internet available. A lot of kids did not. And, the one thing, the mobile phone, you can say with little debate, is that the vision of super nerds 30, 35, 40 years ago about a computer being in every home, the computer wasn't a laptop and a desktop, although plenty of those do exist in homes today. It's the mobile phone, and it's a computer, and it can do computerish things that are quite amazing. But the notion from Spider-Man, right? Great power comes with great responsibility. That has to be a part of our tact. And blaming schools alone, when in a lot of cases, phones aren't being managed as they should with parents, and the technologies you mentioned are good examples of that. That's a real critical issue. And I would also note too that, and a shout out to you, Wes, I know that you run parent institutes at your school where you bring parents in and help them understand better the tech around them, whether it's a more practical topic like this or something perhaps a bit more creative, that you can be doing that at your schools too. If you are listening to this podcast, my guess is you probably have some tech skills and probably know a lot about this arena, and go to your administrator. If you're the administrator, do this. It doesn't need to be more than once every couple of months, but bring in parents to come look at the technology that you're handing out to kids. Have parents bring in their own phones or talk about things you can do to better lock things down in your home. You're not going to find bigger advocates than the host of this podcast for more balanced filtering. I do think we overfilter the internet, but that doesn't mean that we would advocate opening it up to things that teens really shouldn't have their eyes on, right? Filtering it can be a real gauntlet, because oftentimes you're blocking things that are really legitimate things, like tools that kids can use to create and connect. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be using some basic filtering software, right? And finding ways to work with companies that are willing to help you, eliminate access to things that truly don't belong anywhere in schools. I'm talking about obscenity and pornography, but at the same time, open up tools so the kids can interact with one another. But you can do that at home too, and the technology is not expensive. And as it turns out, unlike 5 years ago, there are multiple companies that will help you do it and help you regain access so that you can help your kids make great choices with these powerful devices.
We can maybe get to Wi-Fi 6 here in a second, but a couple other thoughts. We've talked on the show multiple times about the Internet of Things, how important it is to update your devices, the benefits of getting next generation Wi-Fi. Both Jason and I have upgraded at home. We're using Google. I think we're both on Google Wi-Fi, right? You went with that as well. Looked at Eero and other kinds of things, which Eero is now owned by Amazon, but it's made a huge speed difference. And these tools also have some built-in tools as far as filtering. But of course, it's not just about what happens at home. It's also about what happens, outside of the home. And I had another thought about that, but it has flown the coop, as many thoughts seem to be doing lately as I'm approaching the veritable age of 50 this year. So, hey, what about Wi-Fi 6? You got a Verge article there saying it's finally here,
Sure.
But does that mean it'll work on my device yet?
So good question. This is following up an article we talked about probably, 4 or 5 months ago. Wi-Fi 6 is the next generation of Wi-Fi. It has lots of interesting features to it, not the least of which is that it has a large pipe, which means you can download things very quickly, large media files. It obviously can't speed up your internet, right, in that if you have X amount of pipe coming into your house, X amount of speed from your cable modem, your fiber provider, if you're lucky enough to be in that condition, or DSL provider. But what it can do is, allow more consistent connections for Wi-Fi devices, which means that you may end up seeing more speed or more of your internet speed. But it's not universally available yet. There are finally some consumer level devices that have this so-called Wi-Fi 6, and I believe it's a Verge article that I threw into the show notes this week. It talks about the notion that stuff you might actually buy as a home user is finally getting there. It is interesting, though, just because the standpoint that, just because advanced Wi-Fi technologies are now becoming increasingly available, schools are a good example of this, that schools are not updating to new Wi-Fi systems every 18 months. And in fact, if you are managing it right, you probably are doing broad Wi-Fi upgrades every 4 or 5, maybe 6 years. But, public Wi-Fi isn't going to get universally any faster, but you can do better things at home.
Let's hit a couple more security articles, because I noticed there's several that you put in, and I totally want to talk about this one. I'm going to keep this in the show notes where I said before, or I wrote before this, terrible password security advice. I'm guessing that most listeners are not regular readers of the South China Morning Post, but that venerable publication, which is not somebody's garage. I mean, this is legit mainstream media. January 14th, the article is called "How to Protect Your Smart Home Devices from Hackers. Smart speakers, robotic vacuums, video doorbells, all are vulnerable." And I actually found this looking for something that I had seen referenced about CES, and I found this article. But here is the paragraph that is just terrible. And hopefully your security professionals, IT directors, others are not giving this kind of advice. But this is in an article published this week. Says this expert recommends consumers find a scheme for passwords that will help them remember a password, such as the words from a song you like. Then mix the words with lower and uppercase characters, numbers that are not repetitive, and special characters, such as an ampersand, asterisk, or $sign. No, this is not what you should try and do, is try to remember all your passwords. I have hundreds of passwords right now between school and home. It is ridiculous. It's crazy. You need to use a unique password, meaning a different password on every site that you have a password for. It needs to be very long and complex. So you should really use a generator to generate a random string of characters. And the only way to do that and be sane is to use a password manager like LastPass or 1Password or something like that. And then also you're going to turn on your two-factor authentication, and optimally you're going to use a security key in order to, provide a physical insurance that it's not somebody who's even hacking your cell phone number or something like that. So that is a little bit of a rant, but hey, we've been ranting about password security for a long time, and I read that today. I was like, what? I just wouldn't have thought somebody was going to be making that kind of advice. Any other security? You've got a couple other ones that you put in there.
Yeah, this is a really quick one, and it could be a rabbit hole, but I'm going to avoid jumping down it. The NSA, which we early days in our podcast, we've been 3.5, almost 4 years now. We did talk about a lot of NSA articles earlier in our days, and one of the things we spoke about was this notion of that the NSA was finding exploits in hardware and software, and then using them to spy on people, and maybe in a sign that the NSA is trying to be a little more balanced in their approach. The NSA found a massive hole in security in Windows, and instead of exploiting it to spy on people, they decided to contact Microsoft, and the hole was so big that Microsoft immediately issued a patch based on it. But lots of software holes. But I was encouraged to hear that the NSA was using their power for good. They're probably investing untold gazillions of dollars in security research precisely to drive holes through those security holes. But I do think it's interesting in this case they use their power for good.
Yeah, and these are good topics to talk about with students, right?
Absolutely.
0-day vulnerabilities. The white hat hackers that are out there, the black hat hackers, corporate, government. We need, by the way, a new generation of hackers to be defending our nation. One of the things as we approach the precipice of open war with Iran was thinking about cyber attack and what are their cyber capabilities and what kind of things might happen and so yes, it is interesting to hear about a current event like that. But let's think about how students, great things to talk about, great things to be discussing the ethics of, and then thinking about how students might be plugging in with their skills that they're moving into not only college but the workforce with. So we need to do our Geeks of the Week because I think it is the top of the hour. Jason, what do you have for us this week?
Sure. I have mentioned here a number of times in the past that I've been just getting a lot of delight out of YouTube channels. I've found a lot of folks that are YouTube hobbyists. They may get enough income to be able to support the videos that they do. But one of the channels I really like, it is delightfully full of geekery. The gentleman's name is Luke. Miani is his name, and he has an interesting shtick. He is an Apple enthusiast, a Mac enthusiast, and he buys Macs from the last 8 or 9 years, and he refurbishes them to be used in the modern world, whether it's an old iMac or an old Mac Pro laptop, or we've talked about in the past that one of Apple's greatest accomplishments is that you can oftentimes use an old Mac with very, very modern software without worrying about it slowing down in speed because of the high quality of the hardware. But he does things like find $300 or $400 Mac Pros. They're 5 or 6 years old, but he'll pull it apart. He'll upgrade the RAM and the hard drive and put a new battery into it. And for all practical purposes, it's a new Mac, and just a really interesting channel. I like it. It's fun to watch, and if you are kind of a hardware geek, I'm many varieties of geek, and that's one of them. It's a great channel. So Luke Miani, excellent YouTube channel. There's also a wonderful Reddit community that I believe he also occasionally checks in on that kind of has that. If you want to buy a used Mac and refurbish it, what does it look like?
Fantastic. So 2 quick Geeks of the Week. My fastest one is a CES reference. It's a company called Twinkly. And if you want to, we've just gone through the Christmas holidays, but, if you love lights and you want to do all kinds of incredible things, whether it's in your dining room, bedroom, wherever, classroom perhaps, then you can order those on Amazon. And Twinkly has an app, and you can have all these lights and use your phone to paint with your finger, and the lights will do what you paint on your phone. And anyway, it will bring not Madison Garden, but Times Square. If you want the Times Square, overwhelming light experience, in your own home or classroom, Twinkly is what you need. And then I have a podcast recommendation. So I've been listening to this one for a while. The podcast is called No Dumb Questions, and it is a show that is hosted by Matt Whitman and then Destin, who does Smarter Every Day. That's a podcast channel I absolutely love. But this is one they just do for fun. It's not maybe they do all their stuff for fun. But anyway, it's a collaboration, and they have kind of their own channels that they do. But this one's together. And this episode's called "Did Humans Find Hawaii?" And it is fascinating, and it is about the oral culture and tradition of Polynesia and Polynesian islands, but the ways in which they learned, and they basically created what was like a polar map. So the island, they would be able to know, concentric circles, how far out, these islands are, but the ways in which it wasn't just navigating by stars, but it was also with waves and the different words they had for waves and all of this and the history. They do a really fun job weaving, history and technology and science and, storytelling and all kinds of things. And I was interested, they, a couple years ago, I guess, or I don't know how long, started a Reddit, I guess, I don't know what is it called when you create is it a Reddit?
Subreddit.
It's subreddit. There you go. And so I put a link, and I'll have it in the show notes, to their discussion thread for that particular episode. But it's kind of interesting because, they've got lots of fans, and then folks will, post questions and things like that. So they're using that as their threaded discussion forum to talk about their show. So they are No Dumb QS. So NODUMBQS is their Twitter, and that is fantastic. So Dr. Neiffer, when you're not here on Wednesday nights? Where can folks find you online to glean additional tips, tricks, and bits of wisdom relating to tech?
I send out a lot of tweets via Twitter. Tech Savvy Teach is my Twitter handle. I like to share. I read a lot about technology. It's interesting to me. I like to share out things about what's going on in various arenas. I also work with the Northwest Council for Computer Education. Blog.ncc.org is our blog address. And I would like to remind folks that early bird pricing for the Northwest Council for Computer Education Conference, which is in March in Seattle, Washington, ends soon. So go to www.ncc.org. We have wonderful speakers this year, and plus you can hear, I think I'm breaking 3 new presentations I've never done before at that conference this year. Really exciting stuff. The one I'm most excited, 2 I'm most excited about is a presentation called Advanced Chromebookology. And I'm also doing a new presentation on reconsidering the notion of reading in the digital world and how we probably need to be a little more mindful of the fact that students bring to our digital classrooms a certain set of reading skills that may or may not be ready for what the internet is throwing at them. What about you, sir?
Awesome. I am W. Fryer on Twitter. My blog, speedofcreativity.org, is where I am posting usually every other week or something, a little post. And I am continuing to update my media literacy curriculum, which you can find on mdtech.cassidy.org. I'll have that linked in the show notes. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but I did have one of my 4 ISTE proposals accepted, and that was to talk about media and digital literacy in the middle school classroom. So that will probably be, assuming I can make the trip, something I'll be sharing this summer in Anaheim, California at the ISTE conference. Are you going to be ISTE bound this year, Jason?
Likely not. My proposal got rejected, and unfortunately, funding's tight. So we'll see. I'd like to go. I think ISTE is a great place to go and connect with folks. But if not, I'll just have to do it from afar.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's not any other conference held that has more, not at the conference events than ISTE. So please do follow us on Twitter. We are EdTechSR. Website is edtechsr.com. Again, as Jason said earlier, I think you can check out all the links and show notes at our website, edtechsr.com/links. Follow us on YouTube. If you are moved by the Spirit, we'd love you to rate us on Apple Podcasts, on other kinds of podcast indices. If they give an opportunity, recommend us and reach out to us. Let us know if you enjoyed the show. And if you're a listener, we love to hear from folks. So until next time, we encourage you to stay savvy and stay safe out there.